He was benched last week. He's traded this week. Joe Flacco will now play for his third out of four AFC North teams after he's traded from the Browns to the Bengals on Tuesday. We'll react to it and explain why and what it means for the Browns moving forward coming up on an emergency episode of the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Joe Flacco traded to the Bengals. Why now? And who is the primary backup now that he's gone? I don't think the answer is as simple as it might seem. I do want to thank you for being in every day with the Locked On Browns podcast and, of course, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, and sometimes even bonus content like this as we get a maybe not a blockbuster, but this was a stunning trade that I did not expect to come down on a Tuesday here leading into week 6 of the season. And it certainly changes the perspective of this Browns team entirely. Started the year with a veteran quarterback under center, and it made some sense, right? Where you're looking at it and you're saying, they're trying to win some football games. And despite questions about why not just lean into the rookies as your guys this year and see what they bring to the table and let them play this season, the Browns were adamant that they wanted to give this thing a shot with a veteran quarterback, and maybe they wanted that veteran to be Kenny Pickett because of injury. That didn't happen, but it ends up being Joe Flacco. And after just 4 weeks, that experiment is over as he's benched in favor of Dillon Gabriel. And after 5 weeks, it's really over because they quickly decide to trade him to the Cincinnati Bengals, who are desperate for a quarterback with Joe Burrow still hurt, trying to get some consistent play and find a way into the playoffs so that if Burrow can come back, they have a shot to maybe go win a Super Bowl. I get it from their perspective, and I do to a degree get it from the Browns' perspective, even though it's kind of an admission that they probably should have just started the season with the rookies being the guys. That's what is so interesting about this. By the way, the parameters of the trade, Browns add a 6th-round pick in the deal with Flacco, and they get a 5th-round pick back in return. So now the 2 veteran quarterbacks that you added to the roster this offseason basically netted you 2 5th-round picks. I didn't pull up, and I'll talk about this probably on Wednesday's show, what slots of picks the Browns now have for next year. I'll have to look that up. But they've added another 5th-round pick to a stockpile of picks that they already have for next year as they continue to just try to add draft capital, likely to give themselves some flexibility to move up and down and all those different things next April. But that's a conversation for another time, because right now it's about the trade itself. Why now? What it means for the Browns moving forward. And I do want to have the backup quarterback conversation here. But more than anything, I think what's important here is why the Browns are doing this now. And I think the answer is somewhat simple in that once they decided to move off of Flacco, they didn't really have much need for him here. I know they talked about his leadership still being important. That is maybe the most interesting sort of part of this from the Joe Flacco perspective is like you even have Myles Garrett after the game on Sunday talking about how, he admires that Joe is going to stick this thing out and be a mentor and a leader as a captain of this team, and how important his leadership will still be to this franchise throughout the rest of the season, no matter who's at quarterback. So I found all that very interesting just in general, that was kind of part of this equation here. But clearly it wasn't important enough that they felt like it was time to sort of make this pivot. And again, I think that is the big part of this is we talked so much in the offseason about who should start a quarterback out of that 4-man competition and whether or not the Browns should maybe just lean into the idea of, hey, you know what? Forget it. These veterans are here, but let's just go with the rookies. Let's just ride with the rookies and make this year about trying to evaluate those 2 guys. But clearly they wanted to sell to that locker room like, hey, we're trying to put ourselves in position to win some football games. We knew that was going to be tough in this opening stretch because the first 6 games to start the season were tough with some tough travel included. But 4 weeks in was enough of the Joe Flacco experiment, and you quickly go to Dillon Gabriel, and now it does kind of feel like they're leaning into the rookies as a whole. I would have been okay if they just started the season that way, but clearly they felt differently and they wanted to give it a shot. And it ended quicker than I think anybody could have anticipated. Obviously, Joe now gets to go play for a team that is a Super Bowl contender when they have Joe Burrow under center. And I think is just trying to sort of piece this thing together after a couple losses in a row with Burrow hurt to try to make the playoffs and give themselves a shot to bring Joe back and then make the play, maybe make a Super Bowl run. And he gets to kind of go down swinging with one lat. Maybe if this is his last sort of ride in the NFL, he gets to go out there and try to make it meaningful. I also think what's interesting from that standpoint is with how much there's been thrown Kevin Stefanski's way this week in the way of criticism from the fan base, from people like myself who have said like at some point he has to own what his record is. He has to own how bad the offense has been. 10 straight games without scoring 20 points. That's a rare feat. And at some point that falls on his lap, right? If Flacco goes to Cincy and he plays well there, I can guarantee you that's something maybe you as a fan is going to be monitoring. I'm sure there's plenty of people in this fan base that are going to be monitoring that. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen because let's face it, that Bengals offensive line, and I see some people in the comments even mentioning this, that Bengals offensive line is a disaster, much like the Browns to a degree, and maybe even worse. Because I think the Browns' internal offensive line group is really strong. But I don't know that that's going to happen, that he's just going to ball out. But if he looks better with the Bengals than he did with the Browns, that's going to be another thing that people sort of look to and say, well, why wasn't Kevin Stefanski producing maybe 20-point games with Joe Flacco, but the Bengals and Zach Taylor can? It's going to be a fair question. It's another layer to this conversation when it comes to Kevin Stefanski and his job security and the development of quarterbacks and all those things that gets thrown into the mix here. But now it's all about the, at least in the foreseeable future, the Dillon Gabriel experience, what he brings to the table, what they can get out of him. This is also the first step towards, as I talked about on another episode, I think this week, if the Browns decide next year that they're not going to take a quarterback in the draft and they're going to ride with Dillon because they like what Dillon shows them and however many games he's now slated to play here coming up, then this is I think a step towards us being able to evaluate Kevin Stefanski's ability to develop a quarterback, even though it's a third-round pick. I get that. I get the context there. But if that's the guy that they hitch their wagon to, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Coaches and GMs in this league ultimately get graded on they get judged based off the quarterback that they tie themselves to. And if that ends up being Gabriel, this is, I think, a step towards that. They are leaning hard into, we want to see what Gabriel brings to the table. I didn't expect it to happen this early. I certainly didn't expect him to move on from Joe so quickly, even after he was benched. But at the same time, it's not like they have much need for him at this point. This does sort of cue, hey, we're all in on trying to see what these rookies can do and set the stage for more of that evaluation process at 1-4 on the season, and things obviously not going the way that anybody had hoped to this point as you were trying to be competitive and whatnot to open up the season. So it's an interesting situation. By the way, first time that the Bengals and Browns have completed a trade with each other. We obviously know about the debacle back in the day in the Hugh Jackson era where the fax machine didn't work and they couldn't complete the quarterback trade then. But this is the first time that they've made a trade between them, the two franchises, and we'll see what it means for the Bengals, if it means anything for the Bengals, while the Browns get another draft pick to use at the disposal. Honestly, I'm going to be honest, I want to see Flacco now in some way end up playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know if it means like we got to wait till the end of the season and then he signs as a backup there next year, especially with Aaron Rodgers likely to retire. Maybe that's the grand plan for the Steelers next year. He needs to complete the entire AFC North, playing for every team in this division before his career is all said and done. I think it's only fitting that he ends that way. But the other big part of this that we need to get into is what it means for the backup quarterback position. Because I've said it, like my gut is telling me this is a pivot to the two young guys and the two rookies specifically. But I don't know that naming a backup quarterback is as clear cut as many probably assume it is after this trade. I'll explain why coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Every day we make decisions, but with PrizePicks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss the excitement of a football season with PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. Playing PrizePicks is such a fun and simple way to make the football season more exciting. You just pick more or less on player projections, like Josh Allen's passing yards or Saquon Barkley's rushing yards or rushing touchdowns, and you're in the game. It's quick, easy, and honestly, one of my favorite ways to follow along with the NFL season. You can create your lineup in under a minute, and they've added a new injury reboot feature, which basically means if your player leaves the game early due to injury and doesn't return, they won't count it against you. How about that? Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, so I'm doing a shorter, abbreviated version of the show here today with just these two segments. But what I think needs to be discussed here before we wrap this one up for today, and I will obviously expound on this even more in Wednesday's show, and we'll hear from Kevin Stefanski on Wednesday, and that's the news everyone's going to be waiting for. When Kevin Stefanski speaks on Wednesday, who will he name the backup quarterback to Dylan Gabriel, the primary backup to QB2? And right now it's Shedeur Sanders. The unofficial depth chart came out before I did this episode, recorded this episode, or went live with you guys. And he is listed as the QB2, but there's reason for that. There's context for that. Right now, as things stand, Shedeur and Dylan are the only two are the only two quarterbacks that are on the active 53-man roster at this juncture. That's it. So by default, he has to sort of be set up as the quarterback number 2. Now, there's a couple of things that could happen here, though, that I think are interesting and will be fascinating to monitor over the next 24 hours once we hear from Kevin Stefanski and so on and so forth to determine what the team's going to do at the quarterback position. Because, while Shedeur is an option, of course, and it could just be what I projected, a pivot to we're focused on the young guys and finding out who they are the rest of the season. I hope that's what it is, to be honest with you. And my gut tells me that is what it is. That's my gut. If you're asking me who I think the backup quarterback's going to be, my gut right here, sitting here today, if I had a gun to my head, would be it's going to be Shedeur Sanders. That's how I feel. I think this is them saying we're leaning into let's find out what we have in these two rookie quarterbacks. We're 1-4. We have nothing else to lose. Let's try it. Okay, that's my gut. But this is the Cleveland Browns, and crazier things have happened. And if you know this organization is a fan of this team the way I do, then you know that anything is possible here. And so option B, outside of Shedeur Sanders being the backup, is, of course, Bailey Zappi becoming the backup quarterback for this team. Zappi right now is on the practice squad, but it's an easy move to make to simply elevate him to the active roster, make him the backup quarterback. It's a move that the Browns don't have to make until Saturday afternoon if they don't want to. About 24 hours out from kickoff against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday. So that's an option for them. And it kind of feels like right now that could be the direction that they go. And at least promoting him to the active roster, depending on where he is on the depth chart, I guess it remains to be seen. But listen, I know plenty of people in my media brethren who are in that room, in that building every single day, who believe in their heart of hearts that the Browns, that Kevin Stefanski would go to Bailey Zappi before he went to Shedeur Sanders. And so I think that's an interesting conversation. I don't necessarily believe that right now. I think it makes more sense to go Dylan, Shedeur, focus on the young guys. But in a world where they're like, you know what, we want a veteran to be the backup in case something goes awry and we got to pivot and go here and we want to win some football games, we want somebody with more experience, maybe that is the route that they would go. So Zappi is one option to potentially be promoted to the active roster and then, be the backup for this team. And then here's the one that nobody wants to hear. And I know that this is going to be controversial, but it's the truth and it has to be talked about. Deshaun Watson is in play. Deshaun Watson is totally in play right now to potentially come back and be the backup quarterback for this team. I'm not saying it's going to happen this week. I'm not saying it's going to happen very quickly here. But now that we've cleared 4 weeks into the season, Deshaun started the year on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list. Now that he's made it through the first 4 weeks of the season, he can be activated to practice, to start practicing any day now. As long as he missed the first 4 games, he's now cleared to start practicing whenever the Browns determine he can start practicing. Last week, Kevin Stefanski was asked about it. He gave a very, very, direct answer of Deshaun's doing what he has to do. He's focused on rehabbing. That's all we care about. Wasn't going to go any further than that, and that's fine. But the outside of that part of it, now that he can be activated to practice at any moment, there's a world where he potentially comes back and starts practicing, and then in the next couple weeks, he could be activated to the 53-man roster, which is how this process has to go. Once you activate him to practice, the Browns have 21 days to then elevate him to the 53-man roster. If he doesn't return to the 53-man roster in those 21 days, he then has to revert back to the physically unable to perform list, and he would be done for the rest of the season via that list and just stay there. The other part of this is they only have 5 weeks. So from week 4, so last week was the first week, they have 4 more weeks that they can actually start Deshaun on a practice schedule and get him back out there on the field. So once they get through those 5 weeks, if he isn't activated to practice, then he would again revert back to the PUP list and miss the remainder of the season. So they basically have up until week 9 to start him practicing. If they activate him week 9, they would have the 21 days to get him ready to then activate him to the 53-man roster. And that's kind of how the process kind of works with that PUP list designation. But the first thing that came to mind when they traded Joe Flacco today was, okay, Shedeur Sanders is QB2. And then I started to think more about it, and it's like, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying that this team wants to see Shedeur Sanders take the field again. I know there's certainly a lot of fans who don't ever want to see Shedeur Sanders take the field again for this Browns team. But there is a world where he returns to practice and he's activated sooner rather than later. People have seen the Instagram videos. I know it's Instagram videos. It means very little in the grand scheme of things, but people have seen them. We've heard people talking about how he looks great and he looks like he's in peak physical shape and he's going to come back, and he's talking about his return to the field and trying to make this another sort of return to football here. That stuff can all be fine and good. We haven't really found out, like, update wise, like how ready he is to actually come back from an Achilles injury and play, but it could be sooner rather than later. And if all of a sudden they're like, all right, well, he's going to be coming back soon, this could have been a move, trading Flacco, that paves the way for him to come back at some point. Again, I'm not saying it's going to happen this week. I'm not saying it's going to be immediate, but that was another thought that I had, was this could mean that they see or feel Deshaun Watson's going to be back in the next couple weeks or so. And so they wanted to clear space for him to be activated to the 53-man roster and be a backup in some capacity. And so maybe tomorrow Stefanski's not naming Deshaun Watson the backup, but is there now a higher likelihood that he serves in a backup role, whether it's the second string or the third string at some point this season, and maybe even plays for the Browns, God forbid, at some point this season? Yes, that seems even more likely than it did 24 hours ago with news that Joe Flacco has now been traded. It's pretty wild that we've gotten to this point, but it's 100% real that could happen. So as easy as I think people want it to be, where it's just, hey, go to Shedeur as the backup, make him the next guy up, make him one play away from being ready to go out there and really embrace the idea of, let's see what these rookies bring to the table. I don't know if it's an easy decision for Kevin Stefanski, or it's as clean cut as people are making it out to be. It is right now because there's only 2 guys in the active roster, but that could change with an update from Kevin, with as minimal as an update from Kevin Stefanski tomorrow. If they say we're going to elevate Bailey Zappi to be the backup, or if they decide we're going to activate Deshaun to start practicing, that changes the math on this quarterback room entirely, and certainly shifts where this thing could be headed. So just keep that in mind. I, again, want to be clear. My gut tells me this is them leaning into this is them leaning into Dylan's our starter, Shedeur is going to be our backup, and we're going to support these rookies the rest of the season to see what they can do. But it's the Cleveland Browns, and you just never know. This team has done some funky things over the years, and there is a world where Bailey Zappi's the backup, named the backup tomorrow, and there's a world where Deshaun's named the backup here. Maybe not as soon as tomorrow, but in the weeks ahead, and that's the direction that this thing goes. It's going to be wild to watch. I'm sure everybody will be tuned in to Kevin Stefanski's press conference tomorrow to see who he names the backup quarterback, because Shedeur, as polarizing as he is going to, if he is the quarterback too, people are going to want to hear it, and they're going to be excited about it, and they're going to talk about it, knowing that he'll only be a play away from taking the field. But don't be surprised if it's a different answer as well. And don't be surprised if you don't get an answer at all and he says his classic, well, we'll see how the next couple of days go, because that's a very Kevin Stefanski thing to do as well, where he just kind of waits to make a decision and doesn't give us anything in the media. But we'll see what he sort of says tomorrow. But I'm sure it's going to be all eyes on him for that decision on who the QB2 is going to be now that Joe Flacco is officially out of the picture via the stunning trade today with the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, first time those two organizations have swung a trade after the failed fax machine for the A.J. McCarron deal back in the Hugh Jackson era. This is the first time they were able to complete it. And ironically, it's also for a quarterback. So another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. Obviously, I will be back with another episode on Wednesday, dissecting this quarterback conversation even more and what this means for the Browns and what I think Kevin Stefanski is going to do. So we'll get into all those things. We have a ton to talk about for sure, leading into the Steelers game as well. It's going to be a busy week. So if you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button, make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcast, and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. For your second listen, get a double dose of the Locked On NFL podcast as well. You can find it at the Locked On NFL YouTube channel or wherever you listen to your podcast as well. And I always like to remind you to keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs and Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland, tomorrow with even more on this quarterback stuff. See ya.